The proximity alert started at 7:14 station time, which was inconvenient because I was halfway through retorquing the coupling array on Bay 7's secondary cargo line, and I had 6 more fittings to get through before the Velardhaven freighter came in at 900. I ignored it for about 40 seconds. Proximity alerts at Kethsoren meant ice debris, usually, or a cargo container that had drifted loose from the outer anchor points. The station sat at the edge of a dispersed asteroid field that the charts called stable, and that proved the charts wrong about twice a month. I had learned, in 4 years at Kethsoren, that most proximity alerts resolved themselves if you gave them a moment. The AI sorted them into tiers: yellow for debris, orange for uncharted mass, red for vessel contact, and the yellow ones went away on their own. This one did not go away. I heard it shift to orange while I was on the 4th fitting. Then, before I had finished the 5th, it shifted to red. Then it held on red and started pulsing, which it was only supposed to do for vessel contacts of a certain size. I had heard it pulse exactly once before in 4 years, when a compact freighter had come in with a blown navigation array and nearly taken out the fuel transfer boom. I set down the torque wrench, climbed down from the coupling array, and went to the Bay 7 operations panel to see what we were dealing with. The display showed me a contact cluster at the edge of sensor range. The cluster was large enough that the AI was having trouble resolving individual signatures. It kept updating the count: 40, then 200, then 800. Then it stopped updating and just displayed a number with an asterisk next to it, which was the AI's way of indicating that the number was provisional and probably low. The number was 5,000. I stood there for a moment with the torque wrench still in my hand, looking at that number and the asterisk beside it, and I thought, that cannot be right. Then Commander Velarath's voice came over the station-wide comm, which she used perhaps 3 times a year, in a tone that she almost never used, which was the tone of someone who was working very hard to sound calm. All station personnel, please be advised of a significant vessel contact at outer sensor range. This is not a drill. Non-essential personnel should move to interior sections. Essential personnel remain at assigned stations. I am attempting contact with the approaching vessels now. I was essential personnel. Base 7 was an assigned station. I stayed where I was, looking at the number on the panel, which the AI had now updated to 5,247 with a smaller asterisk. The comm went quiet for about 90 seconds. Then it came back on, and Commander Velarath's voice had lost about half of its careful calm. The approaching fleet has identified itself as the Velashian Royal Convoy, operating under the direct authority of the Velashian Crown. They are requesting a pause. They are requesting contact with a specific station crew member. The name they have given is Joran Casson. My name is Joran Cass. 1 letter off. I looked at the number on the panel. I looked at the torque wrench in my hand. Then I walked to the Bay 7 comm terminal and opened a channel to the commander's office. "Commander," I said, "this is Cass in Bay 7. I think they might be looking for me." There was a pause on the other end that lasted longer than it needed to. "Cass," she said, "what did you do?" "About 2 years ago," I said, "I pulled 2 individuals out of a wrecked transit pod at the outer docking ring. During the intake process, I gave my name to the log officer, and I think he wrote it down wrong. My hands were shaking at the time. I didn't notice." Another pause. "2 individuals," she said. "Yes." "And you think the Velashian Royal Convoy, which currently numbers," I heard her consult something, 5,247 vessels, is here because of that?" "I think so," I said. "Yes." The pause this time was longer. I could hear her breathing. "Cass," she said finally, "I am going to need you to come to the main docking hub. Right now. Please leave the torque wrench in Bay 7. I left the torque wrench in Bay 7. I want to explain about the transit pod because people have asked me since and I have never told the full version. I have always given the short version, which is, pod came apart, I got them out, it was not a complicated decision. The short version is true. It is just not complete. Keth Soren's outer docking ring handles the smaller traffic, personal transports, courier vessels, light cargo runners. On the day in question, 2 years back, I had been out there running a diagnostic on the Bay 3 coupling, which had been giving intermittent pressure readings for a week, and which the maintenance log had been calling a calibration issue, and which I had been calling a failing seal. I was right. I usually am about seals. The debris event that caused the pod to fail was not a large one. A fragment, maybe 30 centimeters at its longest axis, came off a drifting container that had been sitting in the outer anchor zone for 2 weeks waiting for its registered owner to come and collect it. The fragment hit the transit pod at an angle that opened a 14-centimeter gap in the pod's portside hull plating. At Keth Soren's ambient temperature and pressure differential, a 14-centimeter gap was enough. I heard the impact. I was 40 meters away. I heard it and I turned and I saw the pod venting atmosphere, and I saw it begin to drift from its docking clamp, because the clamp controller had registered the hull breach and executed an emergency release to prevent the breach from propagating to the station structure. The pod was drifting away from the ring at approximately 1 meter per second. Slow, by the standards of space. Fast, by the standards of 2 people inside a pod with a 14-centimeter gap in the hull. The nearest emergency response unit was in the inner docking hub, 4 minutes away. I was 40 meters away, with a pry bar clipped to my work harness, because the Bay 3 coupling diagnostic required one, and with a standard emergency medkit in the tool cart beside me, because I had been carrying one since a colleague had a pressure accident 3 years prior, and the medkit had been the difference. I did not spend a great deal of time calculating. I clipped the medkit to my harness, grabbed the pry bar and went to get them. The pod's emergency hatch was on the starboard side, away from the breach. The hatch had a manual release, but the manual release had seized, probably during the impact, probably a deformation in the frame. I worked it with the pry bar for 11 minutes, which I know because the station's external camera log recorded the whole thing, and someone showed it to me afterward. And I sat and watched 11 minutes of footage of myself fighting with a hatch while the pod drifted, and the atmosphere inside slowly equalized with the outside. The hatch came open on the 11th minute. I went in. The pod's interior was cold and the air was thin enough to make the edges of things look slightly soft, the way they do when your brain is not getting quite what it needs. There were 2 of them. They were young. I could not have told you how young, because I do not always read alien ages correctly, but young. They were seated in the rear compartment, which was the furthest point from the breach, and they had their arms around each other and their eyes open, and they were looking at me with an expression that I recognized even across the species gap, which was, we did not think anyone was coming. I got them out. I got them to the station medical bay. I gave my name and crew ID number to the intake log officer, who was a young man who had clearly never managed an emergency intake before and whose hands were shaking almost as much as mine. He typed what I said. He typed it as Casson, not Cass. 1 letter. I did not notice until later, and by then the 2 individuals had been transferred to a Velotian diplomatic vessel that had arrived at the station within 6 hours, and I had gone back to the Bay 3 coupling to finish the diagnostic, and the failing seal had finally given up entirely, and I spent the next 4 hours on that instead. I did not know who they were. I mean that precisely. I genuinely did not know. Keth Soren is not a political station. We handle cargo and transit and resupply, and the diplomatic news that filters through to us does so slowly and selectively. I knew the Velotian Concordat was a significant power in this sector of space. I knew their vessels used our resupply facilities. I did not know. On the day I pulled two young females out of a drifting pod, that one of them was the heir to the Velasquez crown. I found out 8 months later, from a cargo runner who had heard it from someone else who had read something in a transit news bulletin. By then, the search for the human who had performed the rescue had apparently been underway for 6 months, looking for someone named Casson, and coming up empty. I had considered at that point contacting someone. I had thought about it for approximately 2 weeks. I had concluded that the diplomatic machinery involved in a royal house searching for a specific individual was probably not something I was equipped to navigate, and that if they were looking for someone named Casson, they would figure out eventually that they meant Cass, and that in the meantime I had seals to assess and couplings to maintain, and the Velardavin freighter came in at 900 twice a month, and it always had something that needed looking at. I am, as the commander has told me on multiple occasions over 4 years, extremely good at my job and extremely bad at everything else. I walked to the main docking hub in about 6 minutes, which was fast for Keth Soren's internal corridors. The hub was quiet when I arrived, in the particular way that places go quiet when everyone present is trying to look as though they are performing routine tasks while actually watching something with complete attention. There were 14 people in the hub when I came through the door. All of them were watching the main display, which showed the outer sensor readout and the contact cluster, and all of them turned when I came in, and then most of them looked quickly away, which told me that my name had already been mentioned in connection with the situation. Commander Velarath was at the central console. She was a tall woman, gray at her temples, with the particular stillness of someone who had been managing complex situations for a long time and had learned to contain her reactions. She contained them now, looking at me, and then she said, "They've asked to dock a single vessel. I've cleared Bay 1. "All right," I said. 5,000 warships, Cass. "I know. For you. I know." She looked at me for another moment. Then she said more quietly, "What were they like, the two you pulled out?" I thought about it. About the cold interior of the pod and the thin air, and two young figures with their arms around each other, looking at me with that specific expression. "Scared," I said, "but they were holding on to each other. They didn't let go of each other's hand the whole time I was getting them out." She looked at me for a moment longer. Then she nodded once and turned back to the console. The vessel that docked in Bay 1 was not the largest ship I had ever seen, but it was the most ornamented. It was a courier-class vessel by its dimensions, fast and maneuverable, and every visible surface was worked in Velasquez filigree, the interlocking geometric patterns that I had seen on the smaller vessels that used our resupply facilities, but in a density and detail that I had not seen before. It settled into the Bay 1 docking clamp with the particular precision of a very good pilot who had been flying very good ships for a long time. The docking tube pressurized, the airlock cycled, the hatch opened. She came through first, the younger one. I recognized her before I recognized anything else about the situation, before I registered the formal attire or the court figures behind her or the faint ceremonial marks on her collarbone, because I recognized the way she moved, which was quickly and with complete confidence, and I recognized her face, which I had last seen at close range in a pod with thin air and soft edges, and I recognized the expression on it, which was not scared this time. She stopped 3 feet in front of me and looked up at me, because I had several inches on her, and said, in the flat declarative tone of someone who had been rehearsing this, "You are shorter than I remembered." I said, "You were sitting down at the time." She stared at me, then unexpectedly she laughed. It was a real laugh, not a diplomatic one, a startled sound that she appeared to make without meaning to. Behind her, the court figures came through the hatch in order, 2 and 2, in formal armor, and then there was a pause, and then the elder came through. I knew her immediately also, and I want to be precise about this. I knew her the way you know someone you have carried through a doorway. There is a physical memory in that kind of contact that does not depend on faces or names or context. I had carried her through the pod hatch and across 40 meters of outer ring deck with one arm under her shoulders and the other under her knees, and my body remembered the weight and the angle and the cold, and my brain caught up a half-second later and said, "That is her." She had been a girl 2 years ago, or close to it. She was not a girl now. She was the same height as the younger one. They were close in age, I thought, the way siblings sometimes are, and she was wearing the formal attire of the Velasquez crown, which included a ceremonial collar with the royal mark and a deep formal robe in a color that I could only describe as the blue of deep water, and her hair was braided up in the formal style, and held with a clasp that caught the bay lighting and threw it back in pieces. She stopped in front of me, a pace further back than the younger one. She looked at me with pale gold eyes. She did not say anything immediately. The younger one beside her appeared to be exercising significant effort to remain quiet and was not entirely succeeding, producing a series of small controlled sounds. The Queen, I was already thinking of her as the Queen, because the entire architecture of how she stood and how the court arranged itself around her communicated this without any need for announcement, looked at me for another moment. Then she said, in a voice that was steady and deliberate, "You gave your name as Casson." "Cass," I said. "The log officer was having a difficult morning, so was I." "We searched," she said, "for 2 years, every transit registry in the Velasquez sector and 4 adjacent sectors, every crew manifest at every way station within transit range of Kethsaran on that date. Every individual whose name came close to Casson." A pause. "We found 14 individuals named Casson. None of them were you." "No," I said. "My sister," she said, with a glance at the younger one, who was no longer attempting to be quiet and was now simply watching us with open and unmedicated attention, "told me, 6 months ago, that the man she remembered had hands that looked like they fixed things. She said she remembered looking at your hands when you carried her, because she was trying to decide whether the hands looked like they could fix a broken pod hatch, and she decided they did. We searched every maintenance and technical crew manifest at every way station within transit range." Another pause. "There were a great many of them. You were the last one we checked." I looked down at my hands. They were, at that moment, marked with coupling lubricant from the Bay 7 work and probably a small amount of thermal sealant from earlier in the week. They looked exactly like the hands of someone who fixed things. "I'm sorry it took so long to find me," I said, and then, because I felt this was accurate, "I should have reached out." "Yes," she said, "you should have." There was a directness to this that I appreciated. She was not performing graciousness. She was saying what was accurate. I found I respected her considerably for it. "We have a formal statement to make," she said, "in front of the station and the convoy, with your permission." "You have 5,000 ships out there," I said. "I'm not sure my permission is the relevant factor." The corner of her mouth moved, not quite a smile but something adjacent to it. "It is the relevant factor," she said, "because this is your station and I am a guest in it, and because what I want to give you cannot be given without your consent." I looked at her. The younger one beside her had stopped making sounds entirely. The hub behind me had the specific quality of a room full of people who are not breathing very hard. "All right," I said, "you have my permission." What followed was not brief. I want to be honest about that. There is a version of events in which I tell you the Queen made a statement, and the fleet acknowledged, and that was that. And this version is technically true and also entirely inadequate to describe the 40 minutes that followed. She made the statement to the station-wide comm, in Velasquez first and then in the common trade language, standing in Bay 1 with me beside her, and the court figures in formal arrangement behind, and Commander Velarath and the hub staff at a respectful distance. I do not remember all of it, because I was concentrating very hard on staying still and looking at a point on the far wall of the bay rather than at the Queen, who was standing 18 inches to my left and speaking in a voice that did not waver. I remember the parts that were about me, which were accurate and which she had clearly assembled from the station's emergency log and the medical intake records, and whatever the two of them remembered from the pod. She said, "I came through a hatch that no one could open." She said, "I worked it for 11 minutes and did not stop." She said, "I made no record of who they were, asked for no acknowledgement, and returned to my maintenance duties within the hour." She said, "The Velashian Crown had been searching for 2 years, and the search had found at the end of it exactly what her sister had described, someone whose hands looked like they could fix things." She said one more thing, which I will give you exactly because I have not forgotten it, and I do not believe I will. The Velashian Concordat does not forget those who are worthy of remembrance. This station and this man are worthy of it. Then the convoy acknowledged all 5,247 vessels, in the Velashian formal style, which involved their drive systems producing a single simultaneous pulse that registered on the station's external sensors as a wave of light along the outer sensor range, and which the AI interpreted as an anomalous energy event and logged with a question mark, because it had no other category for it. I stood in Bay 1 and watched it on the secondary display and did not, as I said, look at the Queen. But I was aware of her the way you are aware of something that is very close and very still and watching you. The statement concluded. The court figures redistributed themselves. Commander Velarath crossed to where I was standing and said, quietly, "Cass," and then did not say anything else, which was more eloquent than most things I have heard. The younger sister appeared at my other elbow. "I told her the hands," she said, with the satisfied air of someone who has been proven correct about something important. "I said, find someone with hands like that." "How did you know to look at my hands?" I asked. "Because," she said, with the patient tone of explaining something obvious, "I was very frightened and I needed to know if you were able to fix things or only trying to look like you could fix things. Your hands told me you were actually able, so I stopped being frightened." A pause. "Well, I stopped being quite as frightened." "That's sound reasoning," I said. "I thought so," she said. She told me her name, which was Thessi. She told me her sister's name, which was Scifi. She told me that Scifi had become queen 14 months ago when their father had passed, quietly, without drama, of the specific kind of illness that comes for elders, and that the first thing Scifi had done in her formal capacity as queen was reopen the search, which had been conducted informally before, and which she had placed under the authority of the Crown's Intelligence Office. "She has been very determined about it," Thessi said. "She does not like things that are unresolved." "That seems like a useful quality in a queen," I said. "It is," Thessi said. "It is also occasionally tiring to live with. But I would not trade it." Scifi was, by this point, in conversation with Commander Velarath, which appeared to be proceeding well. The commander had a particular quality of attention she gave to people she found interesting, a slight forward lean, and she was displaying it now. I watched them from across the bay and thought that Velarath was probably getting a very good deal, because anyone who had mobilized 5,247 vessels to track down a cargo technician was likely someone who paid meticulous attention to the things she considered important. "She wanted to come herself," Thessi said, following my gaze. "As soon as the intelligence office confirmed the name, she would not send anyone else." 5,000 ships seems like a significant escort for a personal errand, I said. Thessi looked at me with the expression of someone who finds a statement simultaneously understandable and beside the point. "You saved the queen of the Velashian Concordat," she said, "and her sister, which is arguably less important, but personally I would argue it is equally important. The convoy is not an escort. It is the appropriate expression of what was owed." A pause. "Also, she was not going to travel to the outer frontier without adequate protection because she is very sensible." What will the convoy do now? I said. 5,000 ships can't stay at Kethsoren's anchorage. They'll hold position at outer range, Thesai said. We will stay for a few days. There are things Sci-Fi wants to settle before she leaves. I thought about this. What things? Thesai gave me a look that I could not entirely read. Things, she said. You should ask her, she'll tell you, she is direct. I noticed that, I said. Most people find it surprising, Thesai said, because she is a queen and they expect oblique. She is not oblique, she is precise. A pause, and then with the slightly more careful tone of someone choosing their words. When we were in the pod and you came through the hatch, she said to me, we were both scared, you understand. There was a genuine possibility we were going to die before anyone arrived, she said to me. Thesai, if we get out of this, I want you to write down everything you can remember about who helped us. And she meant it. She meant every word. She has been writing down things she remembered ever since. A beat. She remembers the scar on your right hand. Do you have a scar on your right hand? I looked at my right hand. There was indeed a scar there along the base of the thumb, a pressure seal accident, 3 years back, nothing serious. Yes, I said. She wrote it down, Thesai said simply. She wrote down everything she could remember, because she knew she was going to find you and she wanted to be sure she knew you when she did. I looked across the bay at Sci-Fi, who was still in conversation with the commander, and who, at that moment, as though aware of being discussed, turned her head and looked at me. She did not look away immediately, neither did I. Then she returned her attention to the commander, and I returned mine to Thesai, who was watching me with an expression that contained a great deal of information. She is not oblique, Thesai said again mildly. I mention this in case it is useful. Toward the end of the station's afternoon cycle, when the bay had quieted and the court figures had been given guest quarters in the station's diplomatic section, which was small but clean, and which Commander Velarath had clearly ordered freshened with considerable urgency, Sci-Fi asked if she could see the station's observation deck. I took her there. Thesai came part of the way and then announced that she was going to go find something to eat, because she had been on a diplomatic vessel for 11 days, and the diplomatic vessel's galley was adequate, and she was finished with adequate. This was transparently an excuse to leave us alone, and Sci-Fi acknowledged it with a look that contained, briefly, something between exasperation and affection, and Thesai departed with the expression of someone executing a plan. The observation deck at Kethsoren is not beautiful in the architectural sense. It is a practical space, a long windowed corridor along the station's upper level, with reinforced transparent panels that give a clear view of the outer ring and the field beyond. The asteroid field that the charts call stable is visible from here, a sparse scatter of rock and ice that catches the light of the distant primary star and holds it dully, like things that have never been warm and do not expect to be. The convoy was visible at the edge of sensor range as a faint brightness, too distant to resolve individual ships, present only as a kind of density in the starfield, a place where the stars were slightly less lonely. We stood at the window for a while without speaking. Sci-Fi stood with her hands folded in front of her, very still, in the posture of someone who has learned to inhabit formal situations and does not always remember to stop. You can relax, I said. There's no one watching. She looked at me. Then carefully, something in her shoulders changed. Not dramatically, not a visible dropping of weight, but the kind of change that you only notice if you were watching for it. I don't, she said, do this very often. Stand at windows. Go somewhere because I want to, she said, rather than because it is required. I thought about that, and you wanted to come here. I needed to come here, she said. There is a difference. I needed to find you. She stopped. Started again more carefully. When someone does something that matters and you cannot acknowledge it, it stays in you, unresolved. I do not like things that are unresolved. Your sister mentioned that. My sister mentions many things. A pause. She is not wrong about that one. Can I ask something? I said. Yes. What will you give the station? You said there were things to settle. She turned to look at me directly. Preferred resupply status in the Velocian Compact. Priority docking access. A permanent diplomatic liaison. And a personal letter from the Crown to your station commander, which she will probably have framed, commending the conduct and professionalism of Keth Soren's maintenance staff. Velarath will frame it, I agreed. She'll frame it immediately. I know, Scifi said. I have spoken with her for 2 hours. She is excellent. She has managed this station with minimal resources for 9 years and the maintenance records are impeccable. A slight pause. She told me you are responsible for approximately 60% of those records. The seals matter, I said. If the seals fail, everything else fails. Yes, she said. That is what she said you would say. We were quiet for a moment. The convoy's distant brightness held steady at the edge of the field. I tried to comprehend 5,000 ships and found I couldn't, quite. The number was too large to feel real, like a figure on a budget sheet that refers to something you have never seen. I didn't know, I said. When I went into the pod, I didn't know who you were. I know, she said. I know you didn't, that is, she stopped. That is the thing I needed to say, not the statement in the bay, that was the official acknowledgement. This is what I needed to say. She turned to face the window again. You came because there were 2 people in trouble, not because of what we were, not because of what might be owed or gained. You came because it was the right thing to do and you were the one who was there. A pause. That is rarer than it should be. Anyone would have done it, I said. She looked at me with an expression that was very calm and very certain. No, she said, they wouldn't. I know this because we checked. 14 other crew members were within response range of the outer ring on that day. None of them came. The station emergency response unit arrived 4 minutes after you did. You were the only one who came. She held my gaze. Anyone would have done it is something people say to make the person who did it feel less singular. I understand why, but it is not accurate and I prefer accuracy. I did not say anything to that. There was not much to say. I was not unconscious, she said after a moment, in the pod. I was cold and the air was thin and I could not move very well, but I was aware. I heard you working the hatch, 11 minutes. I counted. I kept thinking, stop or keep going, one or the other, but he will not just keep going. And then you kept going. A pause that was not quite even. You kept going. The hatch was frozen, I said. It needed more time. You didn't know how much time we had. No. But you kept going. Yes, I said. The observation window was quiet. Somewhere in the station's infrastructure, a circulation fan cycled through its routine check. The asteroid field held its patient cold drift. The convoy's distant brightness did not move. Scifi was quiet for long enough that I thought she might be finished. Then she said, in a different register, not the Queen's register, not the formal register, something quieter. Thess, I cried when we confirmed your name. She does not cry often. She went to her cabin and she was in there for a long time, and when she came out her eyes were red, and she said she was fine, and she went directly to the galley and ate an unreasonable amount of food. A small pause. She does that when she has felt something very hard. She eats, I pace. How long did you pace? I said. The intelligence office sent the confirmation at 3:40 station time, she said. I paced until 6:30. Then I called the convoy to order and we left within the hour. I looked at her. She was still facing the window, her hands still folded, and the light from the asteroid field lay across her face in the way that light at the outer edge of map space lies across things, not warmly, but honestly, without flattery. You didn't have to bring all of them, I said. The convoy. No, she said, I didn't have to. But you did. Yes, a pause. You kept going for 11 minutes on a frozen hatch for 2 people you didn't know. The least the Velashin Concordat could do was show up. She turned to look at me. The pale gold eyes were very steady. The least I could do was show up properly. I thought about this. About 11 minutes and a frozen hatch and a number with an asterisk. About a queen who paced from 3:40 to 6:30 and then called a fleet to order. "All right," I said, "that's fair." Something in her face changed. Not dramatically, but the stillness in it shifted slightly, became less formal, became something closer to relief. "There is one more thing," she said. "All right." "The formal acknowledgement covers the station," she said. "The letter to your commander, the resupply status, the diplomatic liaison, that is for the station." A pause. "I would like to ask what I can offer you, personally, not as the queen of the Velashin Concordat, but as," she stopped, chose the word with care, "as someone who owes you something that is not transferable to a station." I looked at the window. I thought about Bay 7 and the coupling array and the torque wrench I had left on the floor. "I have a Bay 3 seal," I said. "That has been giving me trouble for 4 years. I've replaced it twice, and it keeps developing the same microfracture in the same location. I suspect it's a design flaw in the coupling housing itself, but I don't have access to the original engineering specifications." Scifi looked at me. "The Velashin Engineering Corps," she said, after a moment, "has access to specifications for approximately 60% of all coupling housing designs produced in this sector in the last 30 years. "That's what I was hoping," I said. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "That is not a large thing to ask." "It's the thing I need," I said. She looked at me for a long time. The convoy's distant brightness sat at the edge of the field, patient and enormous and entirely still. "I will have the specifications sent to your station terminal by morning," she said, "and I will ask the engineers to include their assessment of the underlying design issue." "Thank you," I said. "Joran," she said. It was the first time she had used my name. Not Casson, not the crew member. My name, with the correct letter at the end, spoken in the quiet of the observation deck with the asteroid field beyond the glass. I looked at her. "Thank you," she said, "for 11 minutes on a frozen hatch." "You're welcome," I said. "I'm glad it worked." She nodded. Then she turned back to the window, and I stood beside her, and for a while neither of us said anything. Thessi came back eventually, as Thess clearly intended to, carrying something from the station galley and talking before she had finished coming through the door about the quality of the Velardavan spice blend that the galley had in stock, and whether it was possible to purchase a supply of it through the station's cargo manifest. The three of us stood at the observation deck window as the station's lights dimmed into evening cycle, and the convoy held its patient brightness at the edge of the field, and the asteroid field drifted as it always did, slowly and without expectation, through the cold, honest dark. They stayed 3 days. On the morning of the second day, the specifications for the Bay 3 coupling housing arrived in my station terminal, along with a 20-page engineering assessment that identified the design flaw and proposed 4 possible remediation approaches, ranked by cost and complexity. I read through it at my workbench with a cup of something hot and the particular satisfaction of seeing a problem finally named correctly. The second remediation approach was the one I would have designed myself if I had had the specifications. I put in a materials request before 800. On the afternoon of the second day, Thessi found me in Bay 7 working on the coupling array and sat on a nearby equipment case and talked to me for 2 hours about everything she had been doing for the past 2 years, which was a great deal, and about the specifics of how the search had proceeded, and about 14 men named Casson, none of whom had been me. And about the day, the intelligence office confirmed the name and sent the notification and what it had been like to stand in Saravi's office when she read it. She read it twice, Thessi said. The first time very fast, the way she reads things she has been waiting for. The second time very slowly. Then she set it down and she was very still for a while. Then she got up and went to the window and stood there. I left her alone. When I came back she was at her desk and she had already begun drafting the transit order. A pause. She is not oblique. No, I said, she's not. She never has been, Thess, I said. Even when we were young, she has always been precisely herself and I have always been grateful for it. A pause. She is also, I think, lonely in the way that very certain people sometimes are, because certainty is sometimes experienced by others as distance, even when it is not. Another pause. I am telling you this because I think you are someone who can hear it without finding it alarming. I thought about that. I'm a cargo technician at a frontier way station, I said. I don't know what use I am to a queen. You are the use you are, Thess, I said, with the serenity of someone who has thought about this. She is not asking you to be anything else. A pause. She is, I think, simply asking if there is a version of events in which you stay in correspondence. She will not ask you that directly. She will have the engineering corps send you the coupling specifications, and she will write a letter for your commander, and she will stand at the observation window and say what she came to say, and she will go home, and whether you correspond will depend on whether you choose to. A pause. I am telling you this because she won't. She told me she's not oblique, I said. She's not oblique about facts, Thess, I said. She is very oblique about hoping. On the morning of the third day, the convoy made ready to depart. It is a significant operation, moving 5,247 vessels through an ordered departure sequence, and it began at 500 and continued through the morning in a sequence of drive pulses visible on the station's external sensors as a slow diminishment of the convoy's collective brightness. One cluster, then another, folding out of the field one group at a time, until by 900 the outer sensor range showed only the lead vessel still holding position. Scifi came to the main docking hub to say goodbye. She said goodbye to Commander Velarath first, formally, and Velarath received it with the composure of someone who has been practicing composure since 400 and is managing well enough. She said goodbye to the hub staff, briefly, and to the 2 members of the emergency response unit who had arrived 4 minutes after I did 2 years ago, and who had been standing very straight since they found out who they were meeting. She came to me last. Thessi was behind her, and had the expression of someone executing the second part of a plan. The coupling specifications should address the issue, Scifi said. I think they will, I said. The second remediation approach. Yes, she said. That was the engineer's preference as well. It's a good approach. Yes. We stood there for a moment. The bay was very quiet. If the second approach doesn't resolve it, she said, the engineers have offered to send a field consultation. They do them remotely, via comm, and they are apparently very thorough. That's generous, I said. It is standard for Velotian engineering contracts, she said. A pause. We don't have a Velotian engineering contract, I said. No, she said. I've arranged one, with the station. It's in the documentation package that goes to your commander this morning. A pause. It includes a provision for technical correspondence on seal and coupling systems, which I am told you have considered opinions about. I looked at her. The pale gold eyes were steady. Who told you I have considered opinions about seals? I said. Your commander, she said, who has been recording them in the maintenance log for 4 years. A pause. The log is thorough. Your observations about the Bay 3 coupling housing are in it, with a notation indicating that you had flagged the issue multiple times and had not received engineering support. A very small pause. The notation was written by your commander in some frustration. She's been frustrated about it for 4 years, I said. So have I. Now you have the specifications, she said, and a contract that allows for ongoing correspondence with the engineering corps. Another pause, very brief. The contract also allows for correspondence on other matters, at the discretion of both parties. I looked at her for a moment. She looked back. Neither of us looked away. At the discretion of both parties, I said. Yes, she said. That seems like a useful clause, I said. I thought so, she said. Thesai, behind her, made a small sound that might have been satisfaction. Scifi held out her hand. In the Velashian formal style, this meant something specific. It was not a handshake but an open palm offer, which could be taken or not, and which meant something closer to, I am here, and I will continue to be here, and what happens next is a mutual decision. I had read about this once, in a trade relations brief that had come through the station's information feed. I had read it and filed it, and not thought about it again until this moment. I put my hand in hers. Her palm was warm. The specifications will hold, I said. The second approach is right. Yes, she said, I know. She held my hand for exactly the right amount of time. Then she let go, and the court figures fell in around her, and Thesai caught my eye over her shoulder and gave me a look that contained a great deal of information and no words, and then they went through the hatch. The docking tube depressurized, the airlock cycled, the bay was quiet. I stood there for a while. Then I went back to Bay 7 and picked up the torque wrench and finished the coupling array. The Velardavan freighter came in at 900, as it always did. It had a pressure fitting on its port fuel line that was showing early signs of the same microfracture pattern as the Bay 3 coupling, which I noted and reported, and the freighter's engineer and I spent 20 minutes discussing it, and I told him about the second remediation approach, and he took down the specifications. The materials for the Bay 3 remediation arrived on the next cargo run, 4 days later. I fixed the seal on a Tuesday morning, alone in the outer ring, with the asteroid field slow and cold beyond the panels and the station's circulation fans going through their routine checks. The work took 3 hours. When I was done, I ran the diagnostic, and the coupling held clean, no microfracture, no pressure anomaly, nothing but a solid connection doing exactly what it was designed to do. I wrote up the maintenance log entry. Then I opened the correspondence terminal and started a message to the Velashian Engineering Corps. I addressed it, as the contract specified, to the Corps General Technical Consultation address. Then I thought about it for a moment and added a second address line. The second address was the one in the contract's other matters provision, the one for correspondence at the discretion of both parties. I wrote, the Bay 3 seal is resolved. The second remediation approach was correct. I wanted you to know. Then I thought about it a moment longer and added, your sister was right. You are not oblique. I find that useful. I sent it. Then I went to check the Bay 7 coupling array, which had been holding clean since I finished it and which I checked anyway because the seals matter, and if the seals fail, everything else fails. There was a reply in my terminal when I came back. I am glad the seal held. The engineers will be pleased to know the second approach was correct. A pause in the message, a line break. I am also glad you found it useful. I read it twice. Then I set it down, the way she had set down the intelligence office confirmation, the first time quickly and the second time slowly to be sure I had it right. I had it right. Outside the observation window, the asteroid field drifted on through the cold, and at the edge of the sensor range there was nothing but stars, and they were, as they had always been, exactly where they were supposed to be.